There are certain memories that refuse to fade, no matter how much time passes. They linger in the corners of your mind, sharp as glass, impossible to forget. Mine begins with someone I had known nearly all my life. A man woven so deeply into the fabric of my family that he might as well have been blood. He was my father's closest friend, trusted like a brother, welcomed in our home as though it belonged to him too. To me, he had always been Uncle Dan, though there was nothing official about the title. He was simply there. Birthdays, graduations, lazy summer afternoons spent in the backyard while the adults laughed over barbecue smoke. For most of my life, I never thought twice about his presence. He was safe, familiar, steady. Everything a child could hope for in someone who drifted in and out of their daily world. But familiarity is a strange thing. It can lull you into believing you know a person completely, until one moment shifts the ground beneath you and reveals a side you never expected. For me, that moment came after my heart had been broken. I was 26, reeling from a failed relationship that had left me bruised in ways I couldn't explain to anyone else. Outwardly, I wore a mask of strength, insisting I was fine. Inwardly, I was unraveling, and somehow Daniel noticed. He always did. It started simply, almost innocently. A question asked with genuine concern. "You doing okay?" A conversation at the kitchen table that stretched longer than it should have. A hand placed lightly over mine, steadying, reassuring, but charged with something I couldn't name. At first I dismissed it. He was just being kind, I told myself. Just the same watchful presence he had always been. But the more we talked, the more I felt something shift. Subtle at first, then undeniable. His words carried weight. His eyes lingered too long. And deep inside, though I fought to ignore it, I began to crave the attention. The conflict settled in my chest like a storm cloud. How could I feel this way about a man my father trusted more than anyone else? How could I let myself lean into the comfort he offered, knowing it risked everything? Yet even as guilt whispered its warnings, the loneliness inside me clung to him like a lifeline. I told myself I needed the company, the understanding, the simple warmth of being seen. But beneath those excuses, I knew the truth. A line was being drawn, and I was inching closer to crossing it. Looking back now, I see that those first small moments were not as harmless as I tried to believe. They were the quiet spark before the blaze, the whisper before the shout, and once that spark caught, there was no going back. The strange thing about betrayal is that it rarely begins with betrayal at all. It begins with trust, with comfort, with the illusion that everything is ordinary. For me, that illusion was Daniel. He had been part of my life for as long as I could remember. My father called him a brother, though they shared no blood. To me, he was the constant background presence of my childhood, the man who taught me how to throw a ball, who cheered at my school recitals, who never missed a birthday. He was family without the title, someone whose laughter and advice felt stitched into the walls of our home. By the time I was in my mid-20s, that presence had taken on a new weight. I had just returned home after the collapse of a 5-year relationship. My boyfriend had betrayed me, and though I tried to hide the cracks, I felt stripped of every ounce of self-worth. My parents were supportive but distant in their own way. They offered comfort, yet they didn't see the depth of the emptiness I carried. Daniel, on the other hand, noticed everything. It was unsettling how quickly he read me. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to scroll through emails, when he asked almost casually, "You're not okay, are you?" The words slipped through my defenses. I admitted the truth. How I'd been abandoned. How I felt invisible. How I didn't know who I was without someone to tell me I mattered. Daniel listened without judgment, his eyes never leaving mine. He didn't rush me. He didn't offer cliches. He simply said, "You don't have to carry this alone." That moment altered something between us. I didn't recognize it immediately, but looking back, I know it was the first crack in the boundary that had always existed. His kindness, once paternal and protective, began to feel charged with something heavier. And I, in my loneliness, leaned into it more than I should have. After that, his visits grew more frequent. He stopped by with takeout, claiming he'd ordered too much. He texted late at night to check if I was sleeping. He lingered after conversations, his eyes soft, his smile almost secretive. Each act seemed small, excusable, easy to dismiss, until they weren't. I told myself it was innocent, that I needed the support, that he was just being who he had always been. But the air around us told a different story. Attention hummed quietly, thickening with each passing day, and I found myself anticipating his presence, measuring time by his arrivals and departures. And in that anticipation, I began to see him differently, not just as my father's friend, not just as Uncle Dan, but as a man with his own loneliness, his own desires. That recognition unsettled me more than anything else. Because once you see someone differently, you cannot unsee them. It happened slowly, like water seeping into cracks you didn't know existed. At first, Daniel's presence felt like a shield against the loneliness that pressed on me. But the more time we spent together, the more I realized that shield was beginning to feel like a cage, one that kept me both safe and trapped at once. He had a way of noticing the small things. If I skipped a meal, he brought food. If I looked tired, he asked if I'd been sleeping. His care should have felt paternal, but something in the way his hand lingered when he passed me a glass, or how his eyes held mine longer than before, sent a quiet current through me I couldn't ignore. One evening stands out more vividly than the rest. A storm had knocked out the power, and the house sat in darkness, shadows flickering from candles on the table. My parents were away for the weekend, and Daniel showed up unannounced, flashlight in hand, as if he had been waiting for an excuse. We sat in the living room, listening to the rain batter the windows, the silence between us thick. He poured a glass of wine and pushed it toward me, his fingers brushing mine. The touch was fleeting, but it jolted through me like electricity. We talked about my heartbreak, his loneliness after divorce, the way life sometimes left us stranded in places we hadn't planned to be. His words were raw, more vulnerable than I had ever heard from him before, and as he spoke, I realized I wasn't just listening to a family friend. I was listening to a man who wanted to be understood, just as badly as I did. A laugh slipped from my lips at one of his self-deprecating jokes, and in that moment I caught his expression, soft, intent, almost reverent. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. My chest tightened as if some unspoken truth had just stepped between us. I should have pulled back. I should have reminded myself who he was, what he meant to my family, how wrong it would be to let the silence turn into something else. But I didn't. I let the moment stretch, let the possibility linger, because for the first time in months, I felt wanted. When his hand brushed against my cheek, I didn't move. My heart pounded so hard I thought he could hear it. His voice was low, steady, almost a whisper. "You deserve better than the way you've been treated." The words pierced through me. They were nothing extraordinary, yet they carried everything I had been desperate to hear. I turned away before the moment broke into something irreversible. But the damage was already done. The boundary between comfort and temptation had blurred, and I knew it would never be the same again. Because once a door like that cracks open, it's only a matter of time before someone steps through. The days after the storm carried an unfamiliar heaviness. Every glance, every word between us felt charged, as if we were both aware of what nearly happened but too afraid to name it. I told myself to stay away, to rebuild the walls I had allowed to crumble, but Daniel made that impossible. He didn't push, didn't demand, yet his presence lingered like an unfinished sentence. It was late one Friday evening when the fragile line finally gave way. My parents had gone out of town again, leaving me alone in the silence of the house. Daniel called, his voice casual, asking if I needed company. I hesitated, just long enough to know the answer should have been no, then told him yes. When he arrived, he carried dinner in a paper bag, the aroma filling the kitchen. We ate together, laughing too easily, as though the normalcy could erase the undercurrent between us. But when the plates were pushed aside, and the laughter faded, the silence returned, thicker than before. I stood to clear the table, but Daniel's hand closed gently around my wrist. Not forceful, not insistent, just enough to stop me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat, as I looked down into his eyes. They weren't playful or casual this time. They were filled with something heavier, something undeniable. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. "I see how much you're hurting." The words unlocked something I had buried deep. I sank back into the chair, my eyes stinging. For weeks I had fought to keep my composure, to mask the ache left behind by betrayal, by loneliness. But with Daniel, the mask cracked. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. He reached out, brushing them away with the back of his hand, the touch tender, almost reverent. I should have pulled back. Instead, I leaned into it, craving the warmth, the comfort, the attention I had been starved of. And then it happened. Subtle, inevitable. His lips touched mine, tentative at first, as though giving me the chance to retreat. But I didn't. The dam had broken. All the restraint, all the unspoken warnings dissolved in that single moment. The kiss deepened, heavy with the weight of everything we both knew we shouldn't feel. My heart pounded, torn between guilt and longing, but I couldn't stop. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt alive. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, the silence that followed was louder than the rain that had once filled the room. We stared at each other, the enormity of what we had done settling over us like a storm cloud. "This changes everything," Daniel whispered, and he was right. There was no going back, because once a secret is born, it demands to be carried, no matter how heavy it becomes. The hours after Daniel left that night were unbearable. I sat in the dim light of the living room, every corner of the house echoing with the memory of his touch. My lips still tingled where his had pressed, but alongside the thrill was a creeping sense of dread. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross, and the quiet of the empty house seemed to accuse me with every passing second. In the mirror above the mantel, I barely recognized myself. My reflection looked older, wearier, like someone carrying a secret too heavy for her own shoulders. I whispered to my reflection, "What have you done?" But no answer came, just the silence, growing thicker by the minute. The next day, everything felt off-kilter. At school, the chatter of my friends seemed distant, meaningless. My best friend, Daniel's daughter, sat across from me at lunch, rambling about a new TV show. Every time she laughed, guilt clawed at my chest. She had no idea what her father and I had shared the night before, and the thought of her finding out made my stomach twist. Daniel, of course, played it cool. Later that afternoon, he pulled up outside to drive us both home, his expression as calm and composed as ever. To anyone else, it looked ordinary. To me, it felt like carrying a live wire between us, humming with everything unsaid. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly when his daughter ran into the house ahead of us. I nodded too quickly. "I'm fine." But I wasn't. Every stolen glance, every brush of his hand against mine in those fleeting, careless moments fed both my longing and my fear. The world hadn't shifted for anyone else, but for me, it had tilted on its axis, and there was no finding balance again. Days bled into weeks. Our secret lived in stolen seconds, a shared look across a crowded room, a hushed word exchanged in passing. And yet, beneath the thrill, a shadow loomed. I lay awake at night replaying it all, asking myself where this road would end. In destruction? In heartbreak? Or in something neither of us could name? Daniel seemed unshaken, but I could see it in his eyes when no one else was watching. He felt the weight, too. "We can't keep pretending nothing's changed," he murmured one evening when we found ourselves alone in the kitchen. I wanted to agree, to demand clarity, but fear clamped my voice shut. Because clarity meant choices, and choices meant consequences. Consequences I wasn't ready to face. So instead, I smiled weakly, washed my hands at the sink, and let the silence stand between us like an unfinished sentence. But deep down, I knew it couldn't hold forever. Secrets like ours have a way of surfacing no matter how tightly you try to bury them,